My mother publicly shared my suicide attempt with 150 party guests. Months later, I reciprocated her public humiliation, watching her openly crumble before her own friends. My mother, Catherine, always had a flair for the dramatic, especially when it came to making a joke. But at my engagement party, she turned my deepest trauma into a stand-up routine for 150 strangers, shattering my world. Months later, I made sure she felt every single piece of that broken glass. Catherine believed she was the funniest person in any room. She'd spent years chasing a stand-up career, barely scraping by with 5-minute stints at dive bars, but in her mind she was a professional. Her entire identity revolved around making people laugh, even if it meant tearing someone down to do it. Growing up, every single embarrassing moment I had became fodder for her act. My 8th birthday party, she announced to everyone that I still wet the bed at 8 p.m., thinking it was hilarious. When I got my first period and bled through my trousers at school, it became her closing line for months. But nothing, and I mean nothing, compared to what she did at my engagement party. I'd been with my fiancé, Ethan, for 3 years, and this party was a huge deal. Hosted at his parents' country club, packed with his entire family, his father's business associates, everyone significant in his life. Catherine arrived already tipsy, draped in a sequin gown as if she was the one winning an award. She spent the beginning of the night constantly interrupting conversations with jokes that fell flat. People would offer strained smiles, visibly uncomfortable. Halfway through dinner, she clinked her glass, ready to deliver speech no one had asked for. She started, "Oh, I'm just so delighted my daughter found someone willing to marry her, despite everything." Then she launched into a hilarious anecdote about how she never thought this day would come. She told everyone about my mental breakdown at 19. And she didn't just tell it, she performed it. She mimicked my sobbing, acted out my pleas for help, did an impression of me, claiming I wanted to die. She described catching me with medication, rushing me to the hospital, the 48-hour hold. She even made sound effects for the heart monitor. At one point, she actually got on the floor to demonstrate how I'd collapsed. No one was laughing. Ethan's mother had tears in her eyes. His father looked physically ill. My future brother-in-law walked out. But Catherine just kept going. And the funniest part, she declared, beaming, was when I told the psychiatrist I felt worthless, and he said, "Well, at least you're self-aware." She giggled at her own joke, while 150 people sat in horrified silence. Ethan had no idea about any of this. I'd planned to tell him eventually, but not like this. Not as entertainment for his entire family. His grandmother clutched her pearls. His business partners exchanged shocked stares. Catherine eventually registered the silence, shrugged and said, "Tough crowd," before sitting down like she'd just killed it. Ethan's family left immediately. Half of them haven't spoken to me since. They now believe I'm unstable, or that it runs in the family. Ethan nearly called off the engagement. It took months of couples therapy for him to believe me, that it was a one-time crisis years ago, a moment of deep vulnerability. Catherine, she never apologized. She claimed I was overly sensitive and that humor comes from reality. She even repeated the engagement party anecdote in her next performance, complaining about how wealthy people lack a sense of humor. She actually told me, "You should be glad I made you memorable." Our wedding was 2 months away. Catherine was already planning her speech, asking for embarrassing stories about Ethan to keep things fair. She even bought a white sequin gown that looked suspiciously like a bridal dress, claiming she needed to stand out in photos. I told her she wasn't giving a speech. She just laughed. "Oh, darling, you can't stop the bride's mother from talking." That's when it clicked. Catherine needed to feel what I had felt. The week before the wedding, I invited all her comedy friends to what she thought was my bachelorette party. She was thrilled, so happy I was including her scene. She brought 12 people from her open mic nights, aspiring comedians who all thought they were funnier than they were. I told everyone I wanted to do a roast, but with a twist. We'd roast our parents for all the insane things they did while raising us. Catherine loved it. "Finally," she chirped, "you're developing a sense of humor." She went first, naturally, recounting even more humiliating childhood anecdotes about me. Other people shared genuinely funny stories about their own parents. Then it was my turn. I started by explaining how my mother became pregnant at 17 by her married English teacher, Mr. Parker. How she blackmailed him for money until his wife found out. How he then committed suicide. How Catherine still kept his suicide note, naming her explicitly. The comic laughter in the room died. The air went out of it. I went on. How Catherine put vodka in my baby bottle to make me sleep at her parties. How she brought men home and told me to be friendlier to them because they paid our rent. How she stole my college fund from my grandmother's bequest and blew it on unsuccessful comedy lessons. I told them how she'd been fired from 10 different jobs for stealing. How she'd gone to rehab 4 times, only to leave because they wouldn't let her perform in group therapy. I reminded them about her showing up intoxicated at my high school, how the administration called child services, and she told the social worker I was lying for attention. The room was utterly silent. Catherine tried to laugh it off, but her voice cracked, coming out like a pathetic cough. Her face was pasty white beneath her makeup, a vein throbbing in her neck. I kept going. I told them about the time she arrived at my 7th grade talent show, so drunk she fell out of her chair, and how the other parents had to carry her to the parking lot while I pretended not to recognize her. I spoke about finding her passed out in our bathtub, a lit cigarette burning a hole in the shower curtain, and the Christmas when she sold my Nintendo for drug money, then told me Santa wasn't real because we were too poor. Sam, one of her comedy friends, stood up first. He walked straight out, not looking at anyone, not saying a word. Olivia stared at Catherine, her mouth slightly open. People are unable to stop watching car accidents, and this was one playing out live. Mia, another comedian, kept her phone up the entire time, filming everything. I saw the red light indicating it was still recording. The vindication felt like electricity in my chest. Hot, brilliant, powerful. But something else was creeping in, something icy in my gut. I had just completely ruined my mother in front of everyone she knew, her entire social world. The look on her face made me feel like I'd kicked a dog. She tried that fake comic laugh she used when a joke bombed, but it broke halfway through. "Liar," she rasped, but it sounded weak, pathetic, not angry. She claimed I was making things up for attention, that I always exaggerated, but her hands shook so violently she had to set down her drink. The other comedians just stared at each other, having silent conversations with their eyes. I knew they were suddenly recalling every story Catherine had ever told about me. David cleared his throat, his voice too loud in the sudden quiet. "Maybe we all need a break, some air?" People started moving towards the exit, an uneasy shuffle of chairs and feet. No one spoke. Within 2 minutes, the room was empty, leaving only me and Catherine, sitting opposite each other at a table strewn with empty drinks and wadded-up napkins. She stared at me with an expression I had never seen on her face before. Genuine fear, not her usual fake confidence. "Why would you do this to me?" she whispered, her voice tiny and aged. I told her, "You brought this on yourself, Mom. The day you used my suicide attempt as a comedy routine at my engagement party, in front of 150 people." The words sounded flat, harsh. I watched her face collapse like paper. She started to weep, but not in her usual theatrical way, not like she was trying to manipulate me. Her makeup streaked down her cheeks in black rivulets, making her look different, worse. She kept sobbing that I had ruined her reputation, destroyed her only friends, taken away the one thing that made her feel important. I stood up while she was still speaking, grabbing my jacket. She kept shouting my name, begging me to stay, to let her explain. But I walked out, leaving her alone. The corridor outside the private room felt both bright and silent. I could hear her crying through the door. I didn't feel the happiness I expected. Just exhaustion, a nasty taste in my mouth, like I'd eaten something bitter. Ethan called me 3 times that night, but I let it go to voicemail. I couldn't explain what I'd done. I sat on my couch, watching my phone light up with his name, my gut tightening each time. When I finally listened to his messages the next morning, his voice sounded frightened and bewildered, asking if I was okay, telling me Catherine had called him, weeping about me hitting her in public. The 3rd message said his mother was asking him questions, and he didn't know what to say. Wrath returned to my chest. Of course Catherine had already called him. Of course she was twisting things, making herself the victim, as she always did. She'd undoubtedly told him I was nasty and unstable, that I'd humiliated her for no reason, and that she was just trying to be a decent mother. I flung my phone across the room, and it hit the wall hard enough to scratch the paint. I met Ethan for coffee the next afternoon. He looked exhausted, with dark bags under his eyes, at a corner table, before Catherine could twist it any further. I told him everything that had transpired at the fictitious bachelorette party. I recounted inviting her comic buddies, setting up the roast, waiting for my turn, and then listing every single nasty thing she had ever done. Ethan listened without interrupting, his coffee cooling untouched, his expression growing more serious with each detail. When I finished, he remained quiet for a long time, staring at me with an unreadable expression. Then he asked if I felt better now. The question hit me like a slap. I opened my lips to say yes, but nothing came out. Honestly, I didn't feel better. I felt sick, angry, and terrified that I was growing into her, that I was becoming someone who hurts others while calling it justice. Ethan then told me his parents had asked if we might postpone the wedding. They were concerned about potential family tension during the ceremony. Panic swelled in my chest. I'd spent months organizing this wedding, picking flowers, tasting cakes, fussing over seating charts. I didn't want Catherine to spoil it, to waste another precious day by making it all about her dysfunction. He explained that his mother had explicitly said she couldn't face another public spectacle like the engagement party, and that she was still getting questions from relatives about what they'd witnessed. His father suggested we wait until things calmed down and my family situation became more stable. Stable. The word made me want to scream. My family has never been stable, and it never will be. If we waited for that, we'd never get married. Catherine showed up at my apartment 2 days later, unannounced. After peering through the peephole, I almost didn't open the door. But she looked utterly broken, in a way I'd never seen her. Her hair was dirty and pushed back. She wore sweatpants and an old t-shirt instead of her usual eye-catching clothes. I opened the door, and she walked in without asking, collapsing onto my couch as if her legs couldn't support her any longer. She told me 2 comedy clubs had barred her from open mics, word having spread about what I'd revealed. The Laugh Factory said they were going in a different direction, while the Comedy Store claimed they were booked for the next 6 months. I felt a flash of shame, then remembered her on the floor at my engagement party, playing out my fainting, making heart monitor sound effects as Ethan's grandma clutched her pearls. The shame vanished. Then she said it. The allegation about Mr. Parker? It was real. She was 17, pregnant by her married English teacher. She blackmailed him until his wife found out, and he committed suicide. She claimed she'd carried the guilt for 27 years, still had nightmares of his wife calling her a murderer at the funeral. She said she was 17 and stupid. She had no idea blackmail could drive someone to that. She revealed that his suicide note addressed her by name, stating she had wrecked his life and marriage, and she had kept it hidden in a box under her bed for years. I sat there, stunned. Catherine never acknowledged anything, never accepted responsibility, never showed genuine sorrow that wasn't just manipulation. I wasn't sure if this was true honesty or just another performance, another attempt to make herself the victim. Ethan's parents invited us both to supper at their home to clear the air before the wedding. I knew it was some kind of test. Catherine promised she'd behave, that she'd apologize properly, that she understood how important this was. But I didn't believe she could go through one dinner without making everything about herself. Ethan confirmed this dinner was crucial, that his mother was still unsure if she could accept our marriage after everything. The entire drive there, I felt like I was going to vomit. Catherine met me there, arriving in her beat-up car, wearing a simple black outfit that looked almost funereal. We walked up to the house in silence, and I could feel her trembling beside me. The dinner began awkwardly and only grew worse. Ethan's mother was coldly polite, in that way wealthy people are when they despise you but adhere to strict etiquette. His father barely spoke, passing plates and cutting his meal with precise, aggressive gestures. Catherine launched into an apology that started well, but quickly devolved into excuses about her terrible past, struggling as a single mother, never having any help. Ethan's mother let her speak for about 2 minutes before cutting her off mid-sentence, stating, "Many people have difficult lives without abusing their children's pain for attention and pleasure." The words hung in the air like smoke. Catherine's face went crimson, then white. Ethan's father laid down his fork. "Catherine," he asked, his voice sharp, "do you intend to use my son's wedding as fodder? Have you already begun working on jokes about my family?" The question was so direct, so nasty, that for a split second, I felt defensive of Catherine. Then I realized he was right to ask. Catherine's lips opened and closed, but nothing came out. Her chest rose and fell in fast, shallow movements, as if she couldn't get enough oxygen. She gripped the edge of the table with both hands, knuckles white. When she finally spoke, her voice was tiny and broken, a sound I'd never heard before. "Yes," she whispered. "I have been a terrible mother, and I knew it even as I was doing it. But I couldn't stop myself. The only time I ever felt important was when I made others laugh." Ethan's father leaned back in his chair. "And this dinner, Catherine? Will this be part of your next routine? Are you already making jokes about us in your head?" The question rested in the center of the table like a knife. Everyone looked at Catherine, waiting for her answer. She shook her head, tears streaming down her cheeks. Genuine tears, not her usual histrionic wailing. "No," she choked out. "I won't deliver a speech at the wedding, or make any jokes about your family. I know I've done enough damage." Ethan's mother set down her wine glass with a harsh click. "It's not enough," she stated. "Catherine needs to understand she's on thin ice with our entire family. One more incident, and she'll never be welcome back." I felt a strange twist in my chest, a sudden impulse to protect Catherine, even though she deserved everything they said. The words spilled out before I could stop them. "She's still my mother, and she will be at the wedding." Everyone, including Ethan, turned to stare at me in amazement. His mother raised her eyebrows, and his father grimaced. I could tell they thought I was making a huge mistake, but I couldn't take those words back now. Ethan drove me home after dinner without saying a word. Just the hum of the engine and some soft radio music I couldn't focus on. He parked in my apartment lot, switched off the car but didn't move. He just sat there, staring at the steering wheel. "Do you want Catherine at the wedding?" he asked. "Or are you doing this because you feel obligated?" I opened my mouth to respond, but realized I didn't know. I'd spent so much time being furious with her that I hadn't considered what I truly wanted. He turned to face me. "It's okay to uninvite her if it makes you feel safer on our wedding day. My family will understand and support whatever you decide." I told him I needed time to think. He nodded, kissed my forehead, and promised to call me tomorrow. I went inside and lay on my couch for hours, staring at the ceiling, replaying the dinner, trying to figure out what emotions lay beneath all the anger. 2 days passed. I barely left my apartment, ordering food, phone in hand, staring at Catherine's contact info. I reflected on all the times she'd humiliated me, all the boundaries she'd shattered, all the ways she'd exploited my misery. But I also thought about the wedding without her, how everyone would wonder where she was, why she wasn't there. how the entire day would become about her absence, rather than about Ethan and me starting our lives together. I picked up my phone and called her before I could change my mind. She answered on the first ring, as if she'd been waiting. I told her she could attend the wedding, but there would be strict rules. No speech, no jokes about me or our family. And if she drank too much, my cousin would escort her out, no questions asked. She agreed instantly without fighting or making excuses. And the fact that she didn't fight me scared me far more than if she had. 2 days later, my wedding planner called. I could hear the stress in her voice before she even explained why. Catherine had personally contacted her about microphone access during the reception, wanting to know the technical setup and the ideal time to use it. Rage flooded my body, making my hands shake. Catherine had practically guaranteed me just days before that she wouldn't give a speech. I left work early, driving straight to Catherine's apartment. I didn't even call. I knew if I warned her, she'd make an excuse. She opened the door in sweatpants, her hair a mess. I pushed past her into the living room. When I confronted her about calling the wedding planner, she raised her hands, claiming she only wanted to perform a song, not a speech, a musical homage. I told her I knew she was lying, that she was planning a spectacle to make everyone talk about her again. I stood in her disorganized living room, comedy notes strewn everywhere, and warned her. If she did anything at the wedding that drew attention to herself, I would never speak to her again. She burst into tears. Not the fake crying she usually performed, but genuine, ugly sobbing that made her whole body quiver. She claimed I was being harsh, that she just wanted to celebrate her only daughter's wedding, that I was treating her like a criminal. I didn't move, didn't soften my voice. I just stood there and told her celebrations had always meant embarrassing me, and I wouldn't let it happen again. She collapsed onto the couch, burying her face in her hands. For a split second, I almost felt bad. Then I remembered the engagement party, the playing out of my suicide attempt for laughs. I left without saying goodbye and drove to Ethan's apartment. Ethan listened to everything, then suggested we hire security for the wedding, specifically to manage Catherine. As ridiculous as it sounded, I knew it was vital. While I was there, his parents called him. After he explained the situation, they volunteered to pay for the security themselves, saying they didn't trust Catherine after what had transpired. I agreed. I knew I needed to protect my wedding day, even if it meant viewing my own mother as a threat to my happiness. We spent the rest of the evening researching security providers, discussing the problem. I felt both relieved and profoundly sad that this was what my life had come to. 2 days before the wedding, I received a message on social media from Sam, one of Catherine's comedy friends who had been at the faux bachelorette party. He said he wanted to speak with me about something important and suggested coffee. I almost ignored it, but something about the message piqued my interest, so I agreed to meet him. He arrived looking uncomfortable and guilty, swirling his coffee for a full minute before telling me that Catherine had been calling all her comedy friends, inviting them to the wedding and asking for their support. He said it looked like she was planning something. He wanted me to know, and he felt awful for not speaking out about her behavior sooner. I thanked him, then walked out of the coffee shop, my stomach sinking. I knew Catherine would do something, no matter how many boundaries I set. I drove directly to Catherine's apartment again, not waiting for an invitation. I confronted her about bringing her comedy friends to my wedding. This time, she broke down completely. It wasn't the phony crying, but raw, genuine sobs that made her entire body tremble. She couldn't stand to be alone at an event where everyone condemned her. She knew she had ruined our relationship, but she was still my mother, and she was terrified of being cut out of my life. I stood there, watching her fall apart, feeling deeply uneasy. It was always easier to hate her when she was just being cruel, but this vulnerability made things so much more complicated. She claimed she didn't know how to attend my wedding without her friends as a buffer. She was scared of facing Ethan's family alone after everything. Ethan and I had an emergency appointment with our therapist the next day. I confessed my fear of becoming Catherine, someone who harms others and then excuses it. The therapist helped me understand that recognizing this anxiety distinguished me from Catherine, who never questioned if her actions were wrong or considered their impact. Ethan leaned over and squeezed my hand, telling me he loved and trusted me, but he needed to know I wouldn't use his vulnerabilities in the same way Catherine had used mine. I promised him I wouldn't, and I meant it. But I also knew I had crossed a boundary revealing Catherine's secrets at that bachelorette party. I needed to figure out how to be better than that. We ended the session with a plan for the wedding and clear boundaries for Catherine, but I was still worried about what might go wrong. The night before the wedding, I sat at my kitchen table, a blank piece of paper in front of me. Ethan was at his parents' house for a pre-wedding custom, so I had the apartment to myself. I picked up the pen and set it down 3 times before I started writing. The letter came out messy and honest, something I couldn't say face-to-face with Catherine. I suggested she could attend the wedding with one of her comedy friends, someone who would help keep her grounded, not encourage her act. I stated that our relationship was shattered, and I wasn't sure if it could be repaired, but I was willing to try if she could truly respect boundaries this time. I emphasized that I wanted the freedom to grow in my marriage without constantly worrying about being used as material for her next set. The last line was the most difficult because I had to accept that some part of me still desired a mother, even if Catherine could never be the one I needed. I sealed the envelope and placed it on the counter, intending to drop it off at her apartment in the morning. I couldn't sleep that night. I kept picturing her face at the faux bachelorette party, the moment I revealed all her secrets. I worried if I'd gone too far, or if she would finally understand what it felt like to be humiliated in front of loved ones. The morning of the wedding, I was in my bathroom, trying to fix my makeup, when someone knocked on my apartment door. Ethan wasn't supposed to pick me up for another 2 hours, and the wedding planner had my itinerary down to the minute. I opened the door to see Catherine standing there, my letter clutched in her hand. Her eyes were red, but not in her typical dramatic way. She seemed smaller, deflated. She asked if she could come in, and I almost said no, but I moved aside, letting her walk into the living room. She sat on my couch, holding up the letter, her hands trembling slightly. She told me she had read it 4 times and understood what I was saying. She had spent her entire life using comedy to avoid dealing with true emotions. Her voice cracked as she said she was going to start real therapy, not the kind where she performed for the doctor or cut her sessions short. She said she didn't expect me to forgive or trust her, but she wanted to strive to be better, even if it was too late for us to have a normal mother-daughter relationship. I stood there, unsure what to say. It was the first time Catherine had ever apologized without making excuses or turning it into a joke. She wiped her eyes with the back of her hand and said she was proud of me for setting limits, but wished someone had taught her how to do so when she was younger. I told her she had to leave so I could finish getting dressed. She agreed and walked out the door. Before leaving, she turned back and announced that she would be sitting quietly in the 3rd row with Olivia, who had promised to be her support person for the day. The wedding ceremony took place in a garden venue chosen by Ethan's parents, with white chairs arranged in rows facing a flower-covered arch. I stood in the bridal suite with my bridesmaids, listening to the organizer give everyone their cues. My stomach flipped every time I thought of Catherine sitting in the audience. Ethan's mother had barely spoken to me at the rehearsal dinner, and his father kept throwing me concerned looks, as if he expected anarchy to break out at any moment. The music began, and I walked down the aisle, staring at Ethan's face, not the guests. Catherine sat in the 3rd row, exactly where she said she would, wearing a modest blue dress instead of the white sequined one she had purchased months before. Olivia sat next to her, her hand on Catherine's arm, and while Catherine's face was soaked with tears, she remained completely motionless and quiet. The ceremony was beautiful in a way I hadn't expected, with Ethan speaking his vows and me saying mine, without interruptions or performances. During the reception, I watched Catherine from across the room. She approached Ethan's parents at their table. I couldn't hear what she was saying, but I saw her speaking without her usual expressive motions or attempts at comedy. Ethan's mother's face remained frozen and tight, but she nodded as Catherine finished and replied briefly. Ethan's father shook Catherine's hand in a formal manner, indicating they weren't suddenly friends, but at least they were polite. I felt something loosen in my chest. Not precisely forgiveness, but rather the first step toward being able to breathe without constantly fearing the next calamity. 6 weeks after our wedding, Catherine and I started meeting for coffee every Thursday morning at a place halfway between our homes. The first few meetings were awkward and stiff, both of us incredibly cautious about what we said. I had established a list of off-limits topics, things she couldn't ask about or use as comic fodder, and she actually obeyed the guidelines without complaint. She told me about her therapy sessions in a genuine way, without faking or exaggerating for effect, simply discussing what she was learning about herself. She acknowledged that her therapist had pointed out she'd used humor as a weapon, to keep people at arm's length, believing if she made them laugh or startled them initially, she wouldn't have to risk genuine connection. I listened, but did not offer forgiveness or comfort. I just let her speak and process without making it about myself. She inquired about the wedding, and I gave her the details that felt comfortable to disclose. She did not interrupt or make jokes. Our relationship will never be normal or straightforward. The damage was too severe and stretched back too far. But I was learning that defending myself didn't have to entail fully destroying her, and that I could set limits without seeking vengeance. Ethan and I were starting our lives together in our new apartment, making plans for the future without the continuous anxiety hovering over us. I still sometimes trembled when my phone rang and I saw Catherine's name, concerned she'd fall back into her old habits. But for now, having coffee once a week with defined guidelines seemed feasible. And that was enough. I was finally free of waking up every day, worried if I'd be her next punchline.